Hello, my name is Dr. Kathy J. Brown. I am Assistant Professor of Art Education at the University of North Texas. Welcome to the next installment in our ongoing conversation with contemporary BIPOC thought leaders and visionaries, entitled the 2044 series, Anti-Racist Praxis as Futurist Art and Design Pedagogy. Today's virtual panel features an innovative Afrofuturist strategist and curator, a multidisciplinary visual artist and educator, and as we unpack the topic, curating culture, anti-racist pedagogy and art and design. Thank you in advance to our audience, and thank you to the OnState Institute led by Peter Hyland, UNT CVAD, and our additional sponsors for their support of this emerging project. As before, this discussion will be framed by four guiding questions this time. Dr. Lauren Cross will introduce herself. She will introduce our illustrious speakers and provide definitions and a framework for additional context for the series. Thank you, Dr. Lauren Cross.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. As my colleague mentioned, I'm Dr. Lauren Cross, and I'm the program coordinator and assistant professor of interdisciplinary art and design studies at the University of North Texas. And I'm excited today to introduce our panelists, but to also foreground our series. So as Dr. Brown mentioned, our discussion topic for today is curating culture, anti-racist pedagogy, and art and design. And we'll be, in this beginning portion, we'll be going over some of the terms that we're foregrounding in the series. After I introduce our speakers, they will have the opportunity to share their screens and present some of their visual content. And as Dr. Brown said, this episode is framed around 4 guiding questions and is an ongoing conversation that we're having that will be pre-recorded and released over the course of the year. So the first term that we're using to foreground our series is Afrofuturism. We draw inspiration from the legal scholar Bennett Caper and his definition of Afrofuturism, and where it asks, what would we be without? What would we be if? And most importantly, by engaging in reclamation, by valorizing a range of cultural traditions that it offers for the future. We recognize that Afrofuturism has many themes and tenets, and that's really a big aspect of what Dr. Brown and I really highlight in the series, from visual art to design, fashion, education, and community. We also are looking at anti-Blackness as it relates to art and design and the ways in which the experiences of people who identify as Black, what those specific experiences look like in the world. And we also look at critical race theory. And in this particular quote, we draw from a definition that Bennett Caper wrote that really thinks about racial hierarchies as being socially constructed, as interest in convergence, and then racism that is embedded in American society. And we support the opportunity to use critical race theory as a method to tell new stories about what our experiences look like. So the 4 guiding questions that we'll be discussing today are allowing our esteemed panelists to talk about the ways in which their artistic contexts challenge and decolonize in their professions. We'll look at how their work reimagines and resists classification. And we'll look at how their works really expound on those tenets of Afrofuturism that I mentioned earlier. And then lastly, how they see the future for Black artists and for Black art in the United States or within the African diaspora. And so now I'm going to introduce our esteemed panelists for today. First, we have Stephen Hamilton, who is a mixed media artist, researcher, and arts educator living and working in Boston, Massachusetts. Hamilton has been an exhibiting artist for the past 10 years. These include solo and collaborative exhibitions at the Medicine Wheel Spoke Gallery in Boston, the Museum of the National Center for African American Artists, also in Boston, the Joan Resnick Gallery in Boston. And for the past 2 years, Hamilton has worked on temporary site-specific large-scale mixed media, textile, and sculpture installations. These include the Founders Project, previously located at the Bruce C. Bowling Building in Boston, and Stitched into Memory, previously located at Atlantic Wharf, also in Boston. Hamilton has work that is in permanent collections and of private collectors, as well as the Museum of Fine Arts Boston and the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston. He is an alumni of the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, where he is also an adjunct professor and is currently a first-year PhD student in African and African American Studies at Harvard University. Help us in welcoming Stephen Hamilton today. And our second panelist is Ingrid LaFleur, who is a curator, artist, pleasure activist, and Afrofuturist. Her mission is to ensure equal distribution of the future, exploring the frontiers of social justice through new technologies, economies, and modes of government. As the founder of the Afrofuture Strategies Institute, LaFleur implements Afrofuturist foresight and approaches to empower Black bodies and oppressed communities. As a thought leader, social justice technologist, public speaker, teacher, and culture advisor, she has led conversations and workshops at the Centre de Pompidou in Paris, France, TEDx Brooklyn, TEDx Detroit, Idea City at the New Museum in New York, Harvard University, and Oxford University, among others. LaFleur is the host of the podcast Decolonize Your Destiny and serves on the board of Just Space Alliance and the Cooley Reuse Project. Help us in welcoming Ingrid LaFleur to our panel. And now I'll extend it onto my colleague, Dr. Kathy Brown, to engage with our panelists.
So our first question I pose to the panel is, in your respective artistic contexts, how is hegemony perpetuated? And it's a two-part. The second part is, how are you as arts professionals decolonizing your practice or your public pedagogy?
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Brown, Dr. Cross. I really appreciate it. It's a pleasure being here. I'm not sure I understand the first question, to be honest. But I think I'll just talk about my decolonizing practice. As I'm a curator by trade, I started with curating visual art, and I end up curating a whole bunch of other things because I'm literally focused on the liberation of Black bodies. I use the term Black bodies simply because it's the Black body that is that triggers people's fears. It is the Black body that is being targeted. It's not really anything else but the presence of the Black body. If you took the body and it changed it, then we would have a different experience. But of course, our attack is not just on the Black body, it's on the Black mind, soul as well. So decolonization for me looks like taking the theories of Afrofuturism and turning them into practice. So I've been following Afrofuturism since it was coined in the mid-90s, and have been wondering, how can we create new destinies that we imagine, meaning Black-bodied people imagine, that we desire, that is not controlled by any other narratives, which are usually colonial narratives or neo-colonial narratives about where we should go, what we should do, how we should serve. And so trying to figure out all the ways to attain that autonomy is important to me. So I look at emerging technology, I look at or follow emerging science, various industries, emerging industries like the space industry, constantly looking at how are we being affected by these things now? What can we do to further empower ourselves and thus hopefully lead to not just liberation, but a sustainable evolving liberation, right? Because we get liberated and then we are not. And that's why I always say that Afrofuturism is a great place for people to create a healthier, more loving relationship to Black bodies. And thus creating liberation for all people, no matter what your background is. I think the centering of Black bodies is healing for most people, because I don't think that we understand how much anti-Blackness has been embedded within our consciousness, our subconsciousness, in our blood. And it's there. I've been to 40 countries in the world, almost 40 countries, and anti-Blackness exists everywhere. There is no place that it doesn't exist, even on the continent of Africa, where we constantly, or I do, escape to, it exists. And that will always hinder our evolution. So part of the decolonizing has to be really hitting that anti-Blackness and trying to dismantle that. We can decolonize all day, but if we're not getting rid of anti-Blackness, we haven't really done the work.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. I agree. I agree with all of those statements. 100%. I think within my own work, I can start with a question about hegemony. I have to be honest with myself as somebody who is, at an Ivy League institution studying, as somebody who has worked at MassArt, which is even though it is a public art school, it still maintains hegemonic practices, especially the primacy of the Western canon through how it teaches art history, through how it teaches what is valued and what's not valued in contemporary aesthetics, and thinking about what is moving forward in the art world and what is rewarded, what's not rewarded, what's uplifted and what's not uplifted. It's still maintaining colonial practices. And as much as I try to disrupt that, I'm still within that. There's a Haitian proverb: the cockroach can't change the chicken's mind from within its stomach. There's this belief that we can be in the inside these institutions, change them from within, but you're actually being swallowed by them. I am not Haitian, so I probably got that proverb wrong, but it's something which resonated with me. In terms of my own decolonial practice, what's important for me is really a deep exploration of pre-colonial African art and aesthetics, and thinking about how that influences our experiences as children of the diaspora. So my work approaches those ideas, and it talks about that through reclamation of labor, through reclamation of narratives, through reclamation of the image of Black people and Black bodies, and also I call it the reclamation of hands. It's a traditional weaver, dyer, wood carver, and reclaiming ancestral hands, which were literally held captive to build, racial capitalist industry in America. So I do that through creating, these, very complex and time-intensive, painting installations that incorporate traditional weaving, dyeing, painting, and wood carving, which is sort of a fusion of Western portraiture and also African technique and aesthetic imperatives. I'm also very interested in the ontological underpinnings of those works. So literally how Black people construct reality and how much of that is very much taken from elements of African philosophy, African perspectives on tradition, on history, on cosmogony, the literal organization of the universe. So thinking about Blackness as sort of this expansive thing. So thinking about Blackness as not something completely fabricated in opposition to whiteness or completely defined by whiteness, but as its own set of cultural experiences that are expansive and never ending and always evolving and changing, and very much dependent on how Black people see ourselves as human beings and how we fit within the universe. So Blackness to me is how I find my humanity, and my explorations of Blackness are very much defined by that. So I think that for me, decolonial practice requires us to really understand that. So how are we not defining, because defining already creates borders and systems of control. How are we exploring our Blackness on its own terms? How are we exploring our Blackness on the ontological and philosophical terms of our ancestors? How do we continue to do that work? How are we decentering white narratives? I think, Nietzsche and Kant and, Foucault, all great, but that can't be how we're defining our Blackness. That can't be the lens, the sole lens that we explore our experiences. How are we thinking about narratives that are told are not valid? Those include like oral histories. Those include African spiritual traditions and philosophical traditions. I was talking to a friend of mine who's an amazing scholar who's like in this cohort with me. He was talking about dreams and the importance of dreams and dreaming. These are things that are very important and like crucial to my work, as is my youth work. I'm very interested in thinking about the democratization of education. How do we create formats for education specifically for Black youth, specifically within affinity for people of African descent, to teach about Black history, to teach about African history, to teach about, to be able to have honest and full conversations about Black experiences. So that's sort of how I end up being, I'm implicit in hegemony, but also ways in which I try to disrupt it and also decolonize in my own practice.
So I have a question. I'm trying to like type it up so that I can post it in the chat. So my question is really about, in your descriptions of both of your practices, I can definitely see presence of interdisciplinarity or even transdisciplinarity, if we even want to use these like very academic kind of words to describe. But I think just the notion that we need all of the tools that we can, basically, to address anti-Blackness, to reclaim, we kind of need to like look beyond like traditional disciplines in order to do these new things or to really have a new future. Like we need more than just like this one thing. Can you all maybe speak to how you came to that place of identifying or thinking about that I need more than this one thing? So for Stephen, it may be like art, Ingrid, art, but also like you said, like technology, all of these other things together, like that's what really shifts and moves things. So like, where did you come to that point of realizing and really practicing that? That's like kind of my question is how did you come to that place of like really transdisciplinarity in a sense?
All right. So first, Afrofuturism, as I mentioned before, I've been involved for a long time, since its beginning, and have witnessed how our relationship to Afrofuturism, our definitions have evolved and changed over time. This is my greatest definition of Afrofuturism. I think it's important to point out a couple things. It's a non-linear movement. So when we're thinking about futures, it's not just a past, present, future situation of one big line. It's a very multi-dimensional kind of future that where the past and the present are always together. We don't separate them out, and you're accessing them all at at any moment of time, which makes trying to turn nonlinear thinking into practice a lot of fun and a wonderful challenge for sure. And as I mentioned before, it centers Black bodies. For me, that's non-negotiable. It is very important to center the Black imagination and all of our desires and fears, actually, within this space so that we can better really understand what is the destiny laid out for us and what destinies we want to create for ourselves. When I got to Detroit, I wanted to employ Afrofuturism immediately. I had never taught before, did not curate anything yet on Afrofuturism, but because at the time, this is about 10 years ago, Detroit was going through a depression while the rest of the nation was going through a recession. And it's at the time, it was 85% Black. So you had like billionaires actively creating new futures for this Black city. And we're talking about white, cis, hetero men trying to use their money to create these futures, not trying to, are like very in this moment. And that just never goes right. White men imagining anything for anybody else just doesn't ever go right. And it was frustrating actually to witness. So I created a project called Afrotopia, trying to understand like how Afrofuturism can exist within the city. And from there, I started teaching youth Afrofuturism. And it was in the classroom that I saw the statistics come alive. For instance, at the time of me arriving in Detroit, Detroit had more fires than New York and LA put together, apparently. And I was a substitute teacher in multiple schools. So I'm bouncing around. In every class, I had children with third-degree burns. And so I would see physically that which I was hearing about, or experiencing what it meant when people are living without water. Water shutoffs were really big. Now, at the time, everyone was talking about tax foreclosures, which was definitely a serious issue. You're foreclosing on people's homes because they can't pay taxes, then it sits empty, becomes a place of danger. It might get set on fire, it might, all kinds of things can happen. But the water shutoffs at that time were not discussed within the larger media. Activists were already discussing it. But the way that the water shutoffs were going, that if you, first of all, we have one of the highest water bills in the nation. We're surrounded by 20% of the world's fresh water. If you look at the Great Lakes, Detroit used to own the water. But when the emergency manager came in, he sold it. The reason our water bill is so high is because not the water itself, but it's the processing of sewage. So we're literally processing the sewage of all the surrounding suburbs. And it made our bill high, not theirs. And these are, not friendly suburbs. Some of them are sunset towns. So, activists, after that's just like a little bit of what I was experiencing in the schools. I went into the activist community trying to figure out, just observing, like, I know you guys are discussing this. I just need to learn, what have you been proposing? What is government not listening to? The reason all of this is happening is because I want our children to imagine, but they can't imagine if they have no water. They can't imagine if they're going hungry. They can't imagine if their parents are struggling to hold on to their house, right? So my curatorial practice shifted into this social justice space because I wanted to get back to the fun stuff of Afrofuturism, but realizing how much we were in survival mode and how that was preventing us to imagine a new destiny for ourselves. In fact, we were just becoming a slave to the destiny that was created through policies and all kinds of oppressive systemic measures, just beholden to that. And so, the activists, when it comes to water, if you're curious, they were proposing 2% of your income would go to paying the water bill, which I think is quite reasonable when you're dealing with a 65% poverty rate at that time, when you add the working poor. So I decided to run for mayor of Detroit. It was not a performance. It was not an art project. It was extremely real. I wanted liberation for our children, literally. I did not believe that our children need to live in this dystopian space. There were too many things being presented by very intelligent people in our city that have mapped out the spatial racism that we were experiencing, how water shutoffs were affecting whole neighborhoods and creating a public health risk. In fact, when the pandemic hit, activists had to voice to turn on the water when it was the main thing the CDC was saying was to wash our hands, right? It took a minute. The government said yes. The governor said yes. And then it took a minute for the city to turn it on. Those kinds of illogical things are prohibiting us from living a full life when we could just deal with it and move on. We can go back to being the innovators that Detroiters are known for being. But if you are taking away constantly really basic resources, then what are we to do? So when as mayor, I proposed a universal basic income, using a cryptocurrency that Detroit would create. I also proposed that our records go onto a blockchain because a lot of the issues for tax foreclosures, for instance, where the names and deeds might be wrong or they're losing things. It was just like mishaps of government, which were really frustrating. I also created these co-creation sessions. And this is how I came to the conclusion of a UBI. Well, not really. I always wanted a UBI, but how I wanted the UBI to act. This is a co-creation session on cannabis. So this is before legalization was coming. We already had over 100 dispensaries. Only, I think at the time, 3 were Black owned. Again, 85% Black city. So I was having these conversations on cannabis, adult literacy, because it was really low at the time, restorative justice practices, growing the creative economy, tax foreclosures, and cryptocurrency, probably forgetting something. But we would sit in a circle, I would present my plan, and then I would just open it up and people would just discuss their experiences, and you just learn about the gray. And I think as politicians, that's what you're constantly negotiating is the gray. It's not the black or the white. That's easy. I wish everything was black and white. It's the gray and figuring how do you deal with the gray? I have to just point out that my most diverse co-creation session was the cannabis series. And that's something that I'm holding on to in my mind. If you want to bring people together, talk about cannabis. And here we are. People weren't even from Detroit. We're in this room wanting to discuss this together. After I proposed my plan of action, the UBI world and the blockchain world wanted to come and find me. And I ended up working for EOS Detroit as the chief community officer. It was my job to educate Detroiters about this really complicated technology of blockchain technology. What is cryptocurrency, how it can be used, why you don't use a crypto or the Bitcoin ATM in the mall or at your local store, things of that sort. And out of that came Detroit. So internet providers tend to be very challenging in making sure that people have access. In Detroit, they look at the credit score of the entire area. So no matter what your individual score is, it doesn't matter. It's of the entire area. So if you're in a lower income neighborhood that was hard hit by the recession, then yeah, you're going to have a lower credit score, which means that they're going to give you internet access at a really low speed at a high price. So the Equitable Internet Initiative was created to create mesh networks all around the city. What a mesh network is that you put a satellite on one house. It bounces a signal to a house maybe a block or so away, and everyone in between can access that Wi-Fi. So you do that throughout the city. Throughout the neighborhood. They did in 5 lower income neighborhoods. And so what Detroit was trying to do, kind of going back to me wanting to create our own cryptocurrency, was to create a currency that would help pay for access to that Wi-Fi. So the person who has the satellite is paying for business level internet access. So this is a way to help support that person in providing this good for the community. And that cryptocurrency we imagined you could use at the dry cleaners, at the corner store, at the coffee shop, wherever. And it would be this initially hyperlocal currency that would eventually become one local currency of Detroit. It was a fun project. We had to table it because of the pandemic, and there's all these questions: are people ready for cryptocurrency? Can they function? And does everyone have a cell phone to be able to use it? It's a lot of different questions that come about when you're dealing with emerging tech. But of course, now with NFTs, we've kind of leapfrogged a whole bunch, and people are in it to win it, and it's a really exciting moment. I created this podcast, Decolonize Your Destiny, so that we can unpack what decolonization looks like in all these different areas: citizenship, photography, economics. And it's still available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you want to take a listen, there's 8 episodes. I do need to come back to it eventually, but it was nice to be able to just hear from other people's perspectives on how they like to decolonize their practice. In 2019, I created this exhibition, Manifest Destiny. You might recognize this billboard. Since the pandemic, it has gone viral. It is sitting in downtown Detroit in one of the trendiest areas. That brown brick building in the back is Shinola Hotel. I was asked to do this exhibition at the Library Street Collective in downtown Detroit, which is highly gentrified to the point that a majority of my friends, I think a lot of Black Detroiters started feeling unwelcomed in the city because you have such a high white population that kind of kept to themselves and didn't really understand what it meant to be in a majority Black city. Again, the relationship to the Black body was, without maybe I think they knowing consciously, was quite contentious. So at first I hesitated because I want to make sure that people can have access to my exhibitions. But then at the same time, I wanted to not be afraid to be downtown because that's part of our city. And period. And so this exhibition included augmented reality. There's in the alleyway behind the gallery space are restaurants and bars, and there's a series of billboards. They're all augmented reality curated by Lady Phoenix. And even There Are Black People in the Future was augmented reality. Where it's like a Star Wars, you're flying through space. I created a store called Dinkinesh. Dinkinesh is one of the oldest collection of built bones found in what is now Ethiopia. And she's over 3 million years old. And I say she's our mother. She's our beginning. Our meaning every single person. And so the beginning of the exhibition begins with the store of Dinkinesh to remind you that you are loved by a Black woman. And I sold like albums, T-shirts. One of the issues with visual art is that it's inaccessible and it's hard for it to like actually get into people's homes because it's so expensive. So I'm constantly trying to figure out what are alternatives to the big pieces, so that because I believe Afrofuturist material should be in your home. And you should be looking at it every day. So you're shifting your consciousness every day. Because decolonization is an ongoing thing. It never has a goal. We'll never be done with it. Just never be done with it, especially as we're starting to colonize other areas. We can talk about that later. And then I also had the visual art project by Hyphen Labs, the neurospeculative Afrofeminism. And the VR experience, you're basically sitting in a futurist Black hair salon. You become a Black woman. And there is an auntie telling you that a Turkle affair happened where the First Amendment is taken away. And so a group of Black female neuroscientists come and they basically archive our memories as a people. And you're basically going through a download in this hair salon. And when you go through the download, you're just in this beautiful, fantastical world that ends with an amazing being telling you that you create your own reality. That piece probably was the most popular. Elders, youth especially really, really enjoy it. And it was the first time that a lot of people were in contact with augmented reality and virtual reality. We also had like 3D printing for our part of our programming. And I mention all of this tech because I think it's really important for me as a Afrofuturist, but also as a futurist, always on the edge, the cutting edge of things to make sure that our people who are usually regulated as consumers know what's happening as soon as possible, even if we haven't figured out how it's relevant for our lives, right? So blockchain technology and cryptocurrency probably wasn't relevant for a lot of people until NFTs came out. So, but to just have an understanding of the tech on its base level, I think it's important so that we can begin participating on a more innovative level. During the pandemic, I interviewed over 35 people for my series. It's on YouTube, What Does the Afrofuture Say? It's a messy, they're messy interviews. Internet's not working, lighting's off. You can see I'm sitting in bed, the whole nine, and it's intentional to keep it that way. This was the pandemic. We were literally experiencing an apocalypse, a historic moment collectively, and none of us were prepared. We didn't get our lights together. There was no place to go to to buy any equipment, to do anything. Everything was shut down. And so this is a really great document of all the messiness and uncertainty and unpreparedness of that moment. And on top of it, not all of these people believe in Afrofuturism, call themselves Afrofuturists. I'm really into complicating the movement and the term. I believe that is part of our evolution so that we can get to the next. And I'm waiting for our younger folks to create the next. But until then, I'm always going to want to really unpack and unearth what Afrofuturism is, what is Afrofuture thinking. And that's why I created the Afrofuture Strategies Institute. So I advise different organizations on how to employ Afrofuture principles and ways of thinking that is inspired by the art coming out of Afrofuturism. And one of our major projects right now is to think like an Afrofuturist. And that is actually the title of my book that I'm writing right now, is basically going into a lot of my personal experiences to show an example of what it means to have Afrofuturism in your practical life. And then it will break down how to do it yourself. And I'm hoping, and I will be also blogging and discussing the latest, greatest in futurism. And I'm hoping that this will be a great place for people to really dive into all of the material of Afrofuturism, and then also really begin to unpack their lives and really get into the nitty-gritty of like how their organization or their personal life are operating and probably perpetuating more colonial ways of being, and constantly decentering the Black body. So this is a way of giving a nice methodology to how you consider the Black body, why that's healing for you, and helpful for your work that you're doing. And hopefully that can expand the imagination and shift your destiny. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. I'm just right. I have so many notes, but I'm just going to make a quick comment before we go to question 2. I just wanted to link some of you guys' ideas because you both kind of, sorry about that. You can hear outside my window, the landscaper, but just make some flavor for the video. But you both kind of touched on ideas of youth and sort of how youth are who have next and how like reimagining and teaching Afrofuturism or teaching Black history to youth, to Black youth specifically. And I thought about also where Stephen talked about, touched on a little bit of Africana cosmology. And I say this in several of our videos, but there's a woman named Queen Quet. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's the high priestess of the Gullah Geechee Nation in South Carolina. And she talks about stitching our histories through time. And she mentions like Africana cosmology and, sort of that universal way, but also the idea how our ancestors inform our present, who obviously inform our future. So I just thought that was interesting when you said that. If you don't know who she is, you should, look her up. But and one of the things that was coming to my mind was when Ingrid said that when she was teaching, she was thinking of how do you teach youth, how do you teach Black children about history and culture? And then you said the same thing, Stephen. So I may come back to that later because I'm always thinking about like K-12, because I'm a professor of art education, and I always kind of tie it back to my teachers. But that can come up later as we move along. But I'm going to go ahead and post our next question. So Lauren and myself, we created this series in part to expand the notions or applications or classifications of both anti-racist pedagogy and Afrofuturism, which are not necessarily mutually exclusive. And how does your work reimagine or resist classification? And the notions of resist classification we got from one of our last speakers named Bridget Cooks, who has who curated a show called the Black Index. But how does your work reimagine or resist classification? And Ingrid has already touched on some of that, but you guys share with us.
I just want to say thank you so much for your presentation, Ingrid. Just blown away. Blockchain, NFTs, your run for mayor, all for it. If I ever lived in Detroit, you would have had my vote. I'm letting you know that right now. Just you would have had my vote. Amazing work. I think for me, in terms of like sort of defying like classification, because like for me, and if you don't, I can also do my presentation. But like for me, I think because my work exists in so many different like places, I'm a fine artist, I'm a commercial artist, I'm an educator, and all of those things interact with each other consistently. I'm, a painter, I'm a traditional artist, and each part of that work exists with each other. So they don't really exist as separate things. So even though I was an adjunct professor at Mass Art, my own personal work has an art educational community-based focus. So what I can do is I can just explain a little bit about my trajectory. I can explain a little bit about what my work does, like as a researcher, because I'm also approaching research in both a traditional and also a non-traditional way. I'm a researcher, I'm an art educator, I'm a dyer, I'm a weaver, I'm a painter, I'm a wood carver. All of these different art forms inform my practice, and they all are completely tied together. So I say a lot of, like, touching on the last question too, a lot of my interdisciplinary work started when I was in Nigeria. So I lived in Nigeria between the fall of 2015 to the summer of 2016. I was there for 9 months. I was in Lagos, Oshogbo, Nogiri, Jumu. I was there studying traditional weaving, wood carving, indigo dyeing, other forms of natural dyeing. And also I was studying Yoruba religion. So I was working with Babalawo, Olorisha, people who are specialists in Yoruba religion and thought. And that was informing my practice. And that goes back into this idea of research. So when I was there, I was learning traditional indigo dyeing. I was learning the history of indigo dyeing. I was learning the place of indigo dyeing and weaving within traditional cultures in Nigeria. My teacher, Ms. Agnes Umechi, who is Ibera from the town of Okene, which is a place of legendary weavers on the women's upright loom, was my instructor. And while I was there, I was learning about this process, this alchemic process of dyeing with indigo and other natural dyes. And I was also learning about the role of textiles and cloth in social life, in religious life, and also in history and folklore. So learning about Indigo Dying and also learning about references to Indigo and Nifa, which is the Yoruba divination corpus, learning about its relevance to Yoruba oral histories, like the founding of Osogbo, which was founded by people fleeing drought from Ijesha, who were in the sacred forest of Oshun, when the hunters were felling trees, chasing an animal in the forest. They broke the indigo pots of Oshun. When she summoned them forth, she told them to leave the forest since they could no longer hear her bell. And then they founded the city of Osogbo. It was said when they broke the indigo pots, they heard voices cry out, "Who has broken my indigo pots?" And they cried out, "Oshoibo, Oshoibo, Ekpeleo," which means like, "O wizard of the forest, keep cool." So like there's these ideas about indigo being associated with like the founding of Osogbo before there was an Osogbo. And also the history of Indigo Dying as a relevant part of the cosmogony of Yoruba people and other ethnic groups in Nigeria. So one of the cornerstones of my practice is that I'm a weaver. I'm a weaver on the upright loom. This loom is used primarily by women across southern Nigeria, but this loom type is a very ancient loom type. Chris Ehret, who is African historian, and also a historian who borrows a lot from, who uses a lot of chronology a lot in his work, has traced the origin of this weaving tradition back 5,000 to 6,000 years. So this weaving tradition is not only very ancient, but was probably practiced by the ancestors of multiple ethnic groups across the African continent. And the relevance of cloth in those social worlds, in those spiritual worlds, is incredibly important. Also, it's important for us in the diaspora because massive amounts of these textiles were purchased by Europeans in exchange for enslaved people in other parts of the continent, as well as gold. Also, the skills required for creating these textiles, most of which were made out of cotton and indigo, were exploited on plantations in the Americas. So there's this complicated relationship with these textile industries in Africa, in the Americas. So I talk about this a lot, about this reclamation of indigo dyeing and weaving through my practice, but also it is a point of research. So I research the importance of these textiles in southern Nigeria, the importance of these textiles in talking about the intersections of gender, commercial power, social power, ritual. And I do that through the practice of weaving myself. So part of this understanding is not simply reading the text and interviewing weavers, but also the practice of being a weaver, the practice of being someone who also creates this material culture. So when I got back from Nigeria, one of the first things that I wanted to do is I wanted to teach young people. My background is in youth education. I worked at Artist Humanity, which is a nonprofit organization, working with youth in Boston. I worked there for 5 years. I worked at Art a la carte, which is a college preparatory art class in Boston. I was also an alumni of Art a la carte. Youth education has been very, very important to me, specifically educating Black youth. So when I got back, I started an initiative called Stitched into Memory. I got a grant from NEFA, the New England Foundation for the Arts. And I taught young people, mostly young people of African descent, traditional weaving and dyeing. So I was teaching indigo dyeing. I was teaching weaving on the upright loom. So you could see Jordan and Lewis, who are like adults now, but like were like 19 when I was like working with them. I started working with them at 14, but like 19 when they were 19, 20 when I was working with them with this project. And Miss Falila from the town of Ogidi Jumu, which is where I learned weaving. So you can see the transference of this tradition from the folks that I learned it from in Nigeria to the United States. We also made those looms out of old shipping pallets. We were also learning about indigo dyeing, having a lot of fun, there was a lot of it was for people just to have enjoyable experiences working with these materials. So that's a big thing. It's like, how are we, like, I've struggled with this and I've worked with this as somebody who is super into like the nerdy academic part of research. Different students are going to walk away with it with different understandings. But what is at the core of what I want to do? And at the core of what I wanted to do is I want people to have a joyous experience working with these materials. and remember this as a positive experience in their life, which they're associating with their identity as Black people. So that has to be the core that I wrap all of this around. Like how much they're able to pronounce Ashofi, how much they're able to understand the history. I have my own goals for that, but the core of it has to be that they are finding joy in this craft that they are associating with Africa and that they are associating with their heritage as Black people. So that's something that I'm really thinking about, like as an educator, and really tempering like what are my goals, and also being realistic about the fact that people approach and people enter this at different stages and spaces, and it's going to mean different things to different people, and I can't control that. So and I shouldn't want to. So like that's something that I'm constantly thinking about with the work. So this is our work, which was created by these students, you know, using indigo and kola nut. This is the group, the Session to Memory group. It's crazy because some of these young people are graduating from college now, or like almost graduated from college now. And this is the installation that was at Atlantic Wharf. Here's me when I had hair, when I had dreads. But yeah, the pieces are incorporating indigo dye, embroidery, like hand-woven pieces, and really thinking about how, you know, we're bringing this into our experiences. It's my dream. It's part of my dream to like reestablish upright loom weaving to Black communities in the Americas. Like I want that to be like our thing. I want that to be like our thing again. So yeah, like after that, like I started work on the Founders Project, so you can see like Stitched into Memory still existing and having life after that. And what that was is it's an ongoing thing, but I wanted to do a temporary. I got a grant from Now and There, which funds temporary. It funds temporary public art installations. And I wanted to do these big installations, these portraits. And I was very interested in pre-colonial African history, and I wanted to talk about the founders of these pre-colonial African ethnic groups. These kings and queens, not all of them were kings and queens. Not all of our ancestors had that type of government. But I wanted to have that conversation because like we talk about ancestry and ancestors, but I wanted to like sort of interrogate that a little bit more and explore that a little bit more. I also wanted to unpack like what it means to be a king or a queen or a founder, and like what the social expectations of those are, the differences that may exist between that and other forms of monarchy. And I also wanted it to be young people, specifically teenagers, because a large percent of our ancestors were teenagers and young adults when they were captured and brought over here. Like we are the descendants of people who were taken when they were like in their late teens, early 20s, children. You know, Koshola Oluwale, Kujo Lewis, one of the like last survivors of Transdisciplinarity, was 19 when he was captured. So just thinking about like that, like also that reality as well was something that was very much on my mind. And the way that I selected students was not, it wasn't like really a heavy selective process. Pretty much almost everybody who just wanted to do it like was painted, but I asked them like, how do they want to be represented? What have they learned about African school, which surprise, surprise is not very much. And what do they want to learn about Africa? Because like one of the things that I'm also thinking about is the development of syllabuses and like other educational resources that we have the control over, that we can use to teach our young people about these things without being dependent on school systems, without being dependent on the university and things of that nature. So students were brought together. My cousin, Stacy Hamilton, photographed them. I also because I do all the weaving and dyeing, like we dress them in like these clothes that like would be used like for the photo references. I always thought students would be like, feel awkward with that, but everyone loves wearing the clothes. Like everyone loves wearing the clothes, which always makes me happy that people approach that in that way. I was able to hire back some of my students who I taught weaving and dyeing, who are college students at this time. So you see them working as my studio assistants. So in addition to me weaving, I'm also able to hire back like people who I've trained in traditional weaving and dyeing to create these pieces. And these are examples of the painting. So this is Janae Wyatt, who is now a junior at Lesley. She's actually a junior at Lesley University, a fine arts major. as Queen Poku, the founder of the Baule people, and Joseph Lewis as Nri. This piece was collected by the ICA, the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston. This was collected by the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. As Nri was the founder of the Nri Igbo. If any of you are familiar with Igbo-Ukwu, the kingdom of Nri, or Ezedom of Nri, because you could argue whether the Ezes were kings or priest kings or other forms of theocratic leaders, but like they were responsible for that artistic corpus. And both of these stories center around a very common theme in West African lore around these founders, which is the idea of sacrifice. Both of them sacrificed their children in order to save their people. So for Ezenri, it is because of famine, and for Queen Poku, it is to escape the armies of the Ashanti Empire. These are also very different periods of time in which these stories arise, but it brings up this idea of kinship, this idea of royalty, this idea that the king and the queen and these rulers are meant to represent the needs of those people, and their personal legacies are subsumed by their responsibility for people. All people are their children. All their people are their children. So whether that works in real life is a different thing, but that existing as an ideal in a people's relationship to royalty and kinship is very, and royal kinship is very important, very interesting to me. So this is all woven on, this is all painted on hand-woven, hand-dyed cloth. And I also carved these panels and dyed them using natural dyes and pigments. This is Damani Senki and Damaria Lender as Daurama and Bayajida, the founder of the Hausa Bakwai. And this is the image of all of the pieces up at the bowling building. This is still like a contemporary thing that I do in my work. So the project that I'm working on now is called Between the River and the Forest, which explores the issues of gender and gendered power in pre-colonial Africa. And what we did is we did a model call for people of all ages. And we did a photo series. So now the photos were sort of existing as art pieces themselves. So the photos were more of a deliberate collaboration with my cousin. But asking people about, like, this project was also about agency, because it's talking about gendered power and gendered agency. So this idea of masculinity and femininity as, you know, these sources of power that can exist in so many different ways, whether you are talking about femininity and feminine presenting bodies, masculinity and feminine presenting bodies, femininity and masculine presenting bodies, masculinity and masculine presenting bodies, and sort of a range of different people of different gender identities, sexual orientations, and sort of thinking about how that becomes situated in African art history, how that becomes situated in the ontology of masculinity and femininity throughout history, and thinking about us as living Black folks in the world now and being able to situate ourselves throughout time. So, you know, this is what that was. So when we did the interviews, we asked people, how do you feel like, how do you see yourself, and how do you want other people to see you? And those were the two sort of guiding questions. So thinking about people's agency and how they're represented. So this is Shalon Lomax. She's like a Reiki healer. She's also a hairdresser. And she spoke about that. And she spoke about like these issues of self-identity and how she functions within a community, and how she functions within a community of women and of women who identify as healers. And thinking about like this very strong, very important role that plays within societies. And thinking about how that would be, how she would be posed, how she would be depicted in the photograph, and also in the paintings that came from the photograph. So these are three participants. This is Chanel Thurvo, who is also an amazing artist, visual artist and educator, Shalon Lomax and Colette Brown, painted as the owners of the earth. So this is exploring Yoruba ideas about femininity and feminine power. Talking about feminine agency as women as the owners of the earth, those who own rooms as the owner of the earth, feminine agency over life and death. but also exploring how that manifests in feminine feminine representations. So you have the indigo dyer, who's an important symbol for that sort of powerful but yet ominous, that beneficial but yet sometimes ominous power that indigo dyers have. They're holding these brass cutlasses, which are associated with oftentimes with female or feminine coded deities or water deities. You see Colette wearing a hunter shirt, which is again playing around with the idea of like queering gender, because like the hunter shirt is a male garment. So thinking about how that like sort of functions within these conversations. This is a amazing scholar. He's also a martial artist. He like goes back and forth between Guinea-Bissau and the United States. Very much connected to like the sort of reclamation of African identities. Named Rasa Malik, who again manifests this very like masculine energy, specifically around like warrior and like being a warrior and sort of what that means in the context of community. Painted as a representation of a horseman, borrowing heavily from the iconography of the horseman in West African art. So looking at depictions of horsemen in Janae Janot, in the Sahelian region, and he's being painted on this like princely robe. So I created the robe, I dyed the robe, I wove the centerpiece, did the embroidery, all of that, and then I painted the figure on this robe. So again, it's like also like, if you look at this one, it's taking the indigo dyed fabric and treating that as like a part of the work. So you see that shine through the figures, but also that is a statement because it's dyed with indigo and the symbolism of indigo and indigo dyers as like these people who manifest a very feminine coded power. So that's sort of how I play around with that in the work. This is the latest piece that I've finished. This is a mural. So again, thinking about time and how we play around with time, how we move back and forth through time. I'm from Roxbury. Roxbury is a historically Black community in Boston. I was born and raised there. My family came up from West Virginia. My grandmother is originally from West Virginia, and all her sisters and brothers are from there. Family came up there and like settled in Roxbury, and like I grew up there. Again, there's a beautiful legacy of public art in Roxbury, art of resistance, art that was very much geared towards getting people excited about learning about their past, learning about their origins, and understanding how they are situated throughout history, and really having people to think about like how they're connected with the African continent, how they're connected with each other. So this is called The Thousand Hoods, and it's borrowed from a quote from the Epic of Sanjata. The valley soon disappeared in a cloud of red dust kicked up from 1,000 feet in hoods. And it's describing the cavalry of the armies of the Sahel during the time of Sanjata. So, it could be imagined as a timeline, but it also blurs time. You see like this first image of this like sort of primordial horseman, which is drawn from images of like Nok horsemen from central Nigeria during the ancient period. So, Nok culture flourished between 500 BC and 200 AD. Earliest Nok culture going back as far as 1500 BC. So these are some of the oldest sculptures of horsemen in West Africa. Then going into the medieval era, you see the mounted knights of the savannah, this horseman, which is borrowed from this image of this Jene horseman here. And this image, which is representative of like the Mossi horseman. This is actually a depiction of Princess Yanenga, the legendary founder of the Mossi nation, the Dagomba princess who led her father's armies into the battle at only the age of 14. And sort of connecting this with resistance in the Americas. So again, these because of wars and conflict in these Sahelian regions and in these savanna regions, you see enslaved people being brought to the Americas during the 16th century. So this earliest group of enslaved people who are from Europe at war or being affected by Islamic nations, or people from Islamic nations that are, dealing with conflicts between these smaller states that, where fighting like accelerated due to like the shrinking or collapse of like a stately power in the region during that time. And then the establishment of these communities, specifically Afro-Indigenous communities in South America and in the Caribbean. So you have that figure here, and then you have this nod to Black cowboy culture in the South, in the Southwest, and sort of connecting that through time. And then you have like this female figure next to this image of the Yoruba woman riding the horse. So this is from a shrine to Oya Iyansan, who is the wife of Shango. And as the wife of Shango, and also like this goddess of the whirlwind, who's associated with fire, who's also a river goddess, she sort of like exists in both this masculine and feminine realms. She's a water goddess. She is a river goddess. She has the beauty of the river goddess, like this associated with fecundity and fertility and motherhood of these river goddesses. But she is also, she who puts on pants to go to war. She's she who grows a beard to go to war. She's she who burns hotter than her husband. So you see her with the baby on her back, which is actually supposed to be an image of a priest on her back. So manifesting this feminine power, but also her riding a horse, which is a masculine power. So playing off of how this situates in this image of a cowgirl in the United States with also this image here. So thinking about how this masculine agency is something that is, regardless of gender identity, is summoned in this space. So that's something that I was thinking on. This is, on the side of the Nubian Gallery in what is now dubbed as Nubian Square in Roxbury. And yeah, that's sort of that. So I function in all of these different places. I'm a muralist, I'm a researcher, I'm an educator, I'm an artist, I'm an art educator. I exist in all these spaces because these borders, these hard lines that exist between these things are themselves fabrications. Like, we don't have to exist in these spaces. Being able to be fugitive, being able to be fluid in these spaces gives us power, because oftentimes these spaces by themselves are violent. The art world is violent. Like education, like, the university is violent. Public school is violent. Like, all of these places are violent. So being too tied to them can be a problem. So I like the idea of being able to float back and forth and move back and forth, and also to remember that there's a component of that is also ancestral, how we think about art and the importance of art and in spiritual and cultural practices are not necessarily the same as they are in our contemporary experience, and oftentimes are polyvalent. And I think it's important for us to have that polyvalence.
Ooh, I don't know if Lauren has a follow-up question, but I'm over here just like slow clap, golf claps. I mean, you and Ingrid, and I'm born and raised in Detroit, as I said before. So Ingrid's work, of course, has a special place in my heart. And the fact that she was really trying to make change and not just talking about it. She was at the forefront. So I just, and then, of course, all your visuals with Stephen, we're just sort of like, it's just like nothing you can say. It's so, so immersively beautiful. But I love that. My question, and it may come back later, is that one of our first talks we did, we had Dr. Joni Boyd Acuff, and that's where I heard of your work, Stephen, is through her article at Art Education. And she was somebody asked, I think one of the people in the chat maybe asked, how can a teacher sort of use Afrofuturism or Afrofuturist artists, how can they use the work in their classroom without appropriating? So say, for example, a K-12 teacher is trying to decolonize their curriculum, which the state of Texas is trying to make illegal, but we digress. But how can a teacher use your work? How can a teacher use Ingrid's podcast or a Manifest Destiny show or many of the things you've done, and Stephen, all your powerful work? How can they use that in their room by decolonizing and not appropriating, I think is what I'm trying to say.
And just to expound on what Kathy is saying, like Joni also talked about like having racial literacy too, like visual racial literacy. And so as you were talking, Stephen, I'm nodding a lot because there's a lot of things that you were talking about that I'm like, yes. Like I relate and I know a lot of the things that you're talking about, but some teachers may not know that cultural history that you're bringing to the table. And so how do you navigate that in the classroom where, teachers may be trying to decolonize, but they don't have that background knowledge? And so then they end up appropriating.
So I'm going to say something sort of controversial, and y'all can cut the mic if you want to. I don't believe everybody needs to be teaching this. I'm going to be really honest. I don't think everybody needs to be teaching this. That's just how I feel about it. And I think that that's sort of, I agree with issues of critical race theory. What's happening in Texas is absolutely ridiculous, but I also know that you trying to package critical race theory in this nice even box so that some, recent grad from like an education program can try to teach this in a way that could be actually harmful I'm not for that. I'm not for that. I create educational materials specifically to be specifically to be used by Black educators. And this is not to say that white people can't teach things or that white people can't do things. This is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we cannot pretend like there has not been a historical pushback for Black people educating other Black people that has been violent, and that has been like incredibly damaging to, how we're able to really educate like our young people. So I think it's very important that like I hate to say militaristic, but arming Black educators with like this, like these resources so that we can have these conversations with Black youth that are going to be helpful for not only helping them navigate these dangerous systems, but also helping them build and create their own worlds and their own, build and create things that exist outside of these like very violent systems that we're told we have to exist in. I think that that's one of the reasons why I just like love what Ingrid was doing so much, because it's like you are creating something where like we don't, fine, you can have it. It's trash anyway. It's probably not going to last that long. We are going to create our own thing, and we are going to make it innovative. We are going to make it inclusive. We're going to talk about all of these issues. We're going to also leave room for complexity and growth. We're going to allow for things to be complicated. We're pushing back on this sort of like idea of like this strict patriarchal, hierarchical way of learning. We're pushing back and allowing this to be immersive, and we're allowing it to be fluid and expansive. And I really believe that it's important for us to hold on to that and to think about how, we are creating these things within Affinity. So I create specific materials which are free and available to everyone. But I encourage people, Black people who are artists and educators, to pick up those materials, to consult with me and talk with me, and also find other ways in which they can use them, which is why I was cool with Jonah using my work. But I also encourage white people who are interested in doing that to understand where you need to step back. That's the biggest issue that I have right now. Where do you need to say, I don't need to interject in this. I need to step back, and I need to like highlight somebody else who is going to teach this work. And how do I facilitate, like them not being abused by like this system that we're working in? How am I making sure that they're getting paid for their time? And how am I making sure that I'm holding myself accountable and also holding other people, white people, accountable so that they can focus on working with these young people and working with Black folks. It is not my job to hold white people accountable for the stupid things that they do and say. I can hold my brothers accountable for these things. I can hold people that I am in infinity with accountable for the dumb, problematic things that they do and say, but it is not my responsibility to hold white people accountable, nor with these power structures am I fully able to do that. So that is the lane that you can go in, and you can let, all the Black stuff be taught by some Black people. You can learn it, you can, work with people on that, but like understand where you need to step back. Sorry.
So, Stephen, tell us how you really feel, because I don't think you. First of all, I absolutely am a fan of your work. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I love how you're grounding the ancestral. I speak about the ancestors and how they need to be present, how we need to think about them when we're creating the tech, how we need to ask for their forgiveness for all the junk that we put in space. But I love how you're physically grounding it and connecting it to really specific skills. And that's something that I'm really into in terms of bringing the theory into practice. And you're doing that beautifully. And I love your work. And I love that you're doing it through joy and pleasure. As a pleasure activist, that's everything. So when it comes to teaching, I completely hear you, actually. Afrofuturism, I've been noticing on a university level, has been taught by a lot of white professors who really have no understanding of Afrofuturism. And it really frustrates me. They flatline it. They make it very shallow. And it's because they don't want to get into the indigenous tech, the spirituality aspects of it. One thing I will say, though, that is really important. I think that teaching is a co-creative process. In order to co-create, you need to come to the table in the most whole, healthy way possible. Most of the teachers who are teaching our beautiful Black youth still are harboring anti-Blackness within them. And I think that this is what you're speaking to, Stephen. You can be liberal and do all the marches, have your Black Lives Matter poster, but until you deal with what's inside of you, you're not going to do us any favors. Our youth are going to suffer because it will come out in the way that you teach, how what you're excluding in the teaching, what you find relevant or not relevant. And so, I love your radicalism, Stephen, but unfortunately, our youth there's so many teachers who are white right now teaching our youth. So I would say first, before you go into curriculums and everything, read the material yourself. Get into Octavia Butler yourself. Read Nnedi Okorafor, read Derek Bell, read and go see the exhibitions yourself and start the process of like decolonizing your own mind. In that process, because it will never end, you will understand, you'll create empathy towards what it means to be Black in this world. And that will then really help to create a deeper knowledge around not just Blackness, but how Afrofuturism is functioning and why we have it. I don't think that a lot of people understand why Afrofuturism even exists. There has always been a futuring that has happened in the 60s. We see that a lot in the artwork, in the music, in some of the writings. We see that even as far back as W.B. Du Bois. But there have been more focus on our present and trying to maintain and create justice within the present without understanding how our futures are still, even as we're fighting for justice now, are still being created for us, right? And how the trajectory that we're on is going to affect us. So Octavia Butler read the headlines and then created Parable of the Sower. So it's not a fluffy, nice, utopian, optimistic book, because what's happening in our world is not fluffy, nice, utopian space. She's literally telling us, if we stay on this trajectory, this is where we're going to go. And so, understanding that Afrofuturism helps to create these predictions so that then we can constantly change the path. And being open and taking the risk of looking at new methodologies and tech. Our elders, I've sat with many of them, especially activists, don't really want to deal with any new tech, even though it's ruling our world. there tends to be sometimes a pushback generationally on these new things that are being developed. Afrofuturism becomes the place of experimentation and investigation of these new things that are coming, that are literally ruling our world. For instance, face recognition. I forgot the statistic, but it more than likely will recognize me as a Black man than as a woman, right? So it constantly misidentifies Black bodies, but yet in the city of Detroit, a majority Black city, they want face recognition all over the place, and it's there, and it's already caused problems. So the Afrofuturist, Tawana Honeycomb Petty is a poet and an activist who's at the front lines. You know, Detroit is constantly at these front lines trying to fight it, because things come to us. These racialized systems come to us more often because we're a majority Black city, that they're constantly trying to dismantle and get rid of the Blackness. Yeah. And so that front line is the Afrofuture. That front line is saying, I'm fighting not just because it's affecting Detroit, it's about to affect everybody in the United States, wherever they want it to exist, Rwanda, South Africa, it doesn't matter. But, you know, we are looking at this microcosm, we're projecting from this place, because we know that whatever the implications are for our community is going to affect everybody else. This is extremely important because we're trying to get ahead of the curve while other people are trying to make sure that we survive. So there's like a parallel that's constantly happening, and it's necessary for all of those points to we need the historians as well as we need the futurists. They inform each other, and it's literally everyone is on a different front line. You know, I've been talking about the space industry for years, and people would think that I was just a hippie talking about space. And here we are with these like big old white phallics going into the Blackness on commercial flights with average citizens going there. Who do you think this labor is going to come from? Who do you think is going to be the guinea pig to deal with these things? And what are the implications of colonizing on a planet that you don't think is alive? So we're repeating history in a whole nother place that we don't have time for collectively to think about, but I do. And that is why Afrofuturism, the books we read, will send us there. It gives us the opportunity to think that far out, so that then whatever we're doing now affects that future. That makes sense. And the grounding in the ancestral, knowing all of that foundation of knowledge is so necessary, because that is what we want to carry into the future. We have to carry those things in the future because it grounds us. Without it, we are not in a good place. I would be cussing right now. So and history tells us this. So history can tell us right now what our future can look like right today. But all of us are here to change that future trajectory. So as a teacher, you have to have that understanding and actually really love Black people enough to know that we can create a different future, not in a pity, sympathetic way, not in this, I'm just going to teach you these things so that, no, on a very radical level, you have to protect, serve, and love these Black children. And I don't know if everybody has the capacity. There are Black people who might not even have the capacity, to be honest. But this is why we're doing the work that we're doing. This is why Trisha Hershey from the NAP industry is telling us to go lay down, because it's a lot. It's overwhelming. And in order to imagine, we need to exhale, right? We need to breathe and take a moment for ourselves to heal. This is just one big old healing process, right?
You're correct. I mean, everything you said, I'm over here like poetry night finger snaps. Stephen, he put in the chat that he has to run and go to class.
I just want to say again, this has been amazing, and this is great. This was very healing, because I had some stuff on my spirit when I came on the call. So this has been amazing. Ingrid, your work is amazing. I'm so excited. this is just amazing. It's crazy because like the high school program that I teach, we're actually exploring Afrofuturism in the class. So like there's just so much there, and it just gives me so much hope for the future. And it's always really it's very grounding to remember that there are people who are dedicated to this work and are doing amazing things. So I thank you so much for what you do. And I thank you all so much for what you do. You are like y'all are on the vanguard, and I really appreciate being included with such amazing like scholars and artists and people. It means a lot.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you and your work so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I was going to say to Ingrid, if you wanted to answer the last few questions and spend a few minutes, or if you wanted to, you guys want to stop now, or just let us know how we can proceed, because we had 2 more questions, but.
Okay, I actually have to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
No worries.
Thank you so much. This has been really awesome. I really enjoyed learning about Stephen. He's amazing. And the series sounds amazing, and I appreciate you guys for doing it.
Thank you for joining us. This has been I'm
life-giving.
Life-giving. This has been life-giving. Thank you so much. I think we all needed this kind of collective moment. So, this moment of agency, this moment of coming together. So we thank you so much for your time and your expertise in sharing with us.
All right. Have a
so much.
Thank you. Stay in touch, and we'll be in touch with you about how we're going to proceed with this recording here, and how we're going to move it into a publication and some other things that we're thinking about as well. So we'll be in touch.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Thank you. And thank you, Peter.
And thank you, Peter.